Aloha, everybody. My name is Rob Hack from the Hawaii Pacific Export Council here in Honolulu. We are a quasi offshoot of the U.S. Commerce Department, a nonprofit 501c3 in Hawaii, and we are tasked with helping Hawaii and Pacific Island companies export. And we should clearly define what is an export. An export is not to another island or to the mainland, but to another country. Most of our companies in Hawaii, when they hear the word export, they first think of Japan or Korea. But today we have a very exciting panel lined up to talk about the USMCA, which is the US-Mexico-Canada agreement, a free trade agreement, which makes it much easier to export from Hawaii to Canada or Mexico than to a country like Japan or Korea or somewhere else. So we have a wonderful panel set up to discuss that today. First, I'd like to thank DBET, which gives us this grant every year to put on this series of seminars and perform one-on-one trainings. We'd also like to thank SBA in Washington, who is the original source of the funds that they pass the money to DBET, and then DBET passes it on to us. With that, I'd like to bring in Jamie Lum to say a few words. She's the program manager of this export program at DBET. Jamie, please. And we do have the DBET website up here.
Mahalo, thank you, Rob, and aloha to everyone. Thank you all for joining us today for this USMCA webinar. Thank you to Rob and the Hawaii Pacific Export Council. They are one of our partners in our HiSTEP program, or our Hawaii State Trade Expansion Program. And as Rob already mentioned, we do, this program is supported primarily through a grant from the Small Business Administration that is intended to increase the amount of US exports. So what we're looking for is to increase the number of Hawaii companies that are exporting and to increase the dollar amounts of Hawaii products and services that are out there in the global market. So the HiSTEP program has been going on for several years. We are the administrators of the state's grant. We do work with several partners like HPEC, like our local SBA, like our local U.S. Commercial Service person here on the ground, small business development centers, and a lot of the other SBA resource partners. But there are several components to the program. The first is our export readiness, of which this webinar is a part of that. We do work with HPEC to put together a number of webinars on export-related topics or topics on specific markets, like today's session. And part of the export readiness also helps companies. We pair them with some of our the business advisors that work with our various partner organizations. And so, Rob, thank you for putting up our HiSTEP webpage here. It is under invest.hawaii.gov under the exporting tab. You can find all of the information on HiSTEP. And I would encourage companies to register, submit a registration form so we can get some information about your company and where you are at in your exporting strategy. And so along with export readiness, and so when companies go through that, we also have other activities that you can participate in. We have our Hawaii Pavilions, which we subsidize, and we take Hawaii companies to exhibit at various trade shows. But as you know, with the pandemic, many trade shows are either going virtual, there's limitations on travel. So although we have a few on our calendar this year, just continue to check our website for updates on that. The last component is our company assistance, where companies can apply for funding to help them implement portions of their export strategy. We are currently taking applications, and we will be accepting applications all the way through June 30th. So you can check that out. There are some eligibility requirements, and I would encourage you to look through that. But if you have any questions, please reach out to me, and I'll turn it back over to Rob. Thank you very much, Rob. Aloha, everyone.
Thank you very much, Jamie. Our first speaker today is in Washington, D.C. This is Christine Gomes. She's the Canada Desk Officer at the International Trade Administration, which is part of the U.S. Department of Commerce. And the first question I would ask Christine is if you could explain to the audience, what is the difference between the International Trade Administration and the U.S. Department of Commerce? I know ITA is under the U.S. Department of Commerce, but what is the difference between ITA and other parts of the Commerce Department?
Yeah, absolutely. Good morning, everyone. Afternoon here in Washington, D.C. So the International Trade Administration focuses on international trade and different types of trade enforcement measures with the foreign governments. And that is one small part of the larger 40,000+ employees in commerce, which also includes the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, Patent and Trademark Office, National Institute of Standards and Technology, Bureau of Industry and Security. There are others out there, but it's a really large agency, and we're only one part of it, but hopefully that's helpful.
Thank you. So today, Christine is going to talk overall about the USMCA and how that can help Hawaii companies. And then after Christine, we have speakers who will address Canada and Mexico individually. So Christine, please, thank you again for being here, and go ahead.
Okay, great. Can you see my screen with the presentation version?
We can.
Okay, perfect. So as I said, good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today. And thank you, Rob and Dale, for inviting me to participate and speak. A little bit about me. I am a Canada Desk Officer in the International Trade Administration, which means I focus on the US-Canada commercial relationship every day. And I was fortunate enough to be a part of the USMCA negotiating team, and I went to all of the rounds that rotated between Canada, Mexico, and the United States, and participated in the chapters that were related to regulatory and intellectual property issues. So today I'm going to give an overview of three main things. The first is understanding the USMCA at large, what's important to know about this agreement. The second would be noting some major changes between NAFTA and the USMCA. And the third part will be to highlight a few new chapters in the USMCA that did not exist 25+ years ago when NAFTA was first negotiated. So I do want to say that this presentation is a little bit more heavy on policy than the next couple presentations that will be presented. The United States, Canada, and Mexico have a tremendous trading relationship, which accounts for more than $1.3 trillion in annual trade. Given this dynamic relationship, it was really important to renegotiate the original NAFTA, which was negotiated over 2.5 decades ago. Many industries didn't even exist at that time that are very critical today. And so we needed to make sure that the 21st century was incorporated. So in terms of the status of the agreement, it was came into force last summer, July 1st of 2020. So we're about 7 months on the books with the agreement. A little bit about Hawaii's trade with Canada and Mexico. As Rob said, many of you who export may first think about Asia, which makes sense. And in terms of the statistics, exporting to Canada and Mexico is a pretty small percentage right now in terms of Hawaii's exports. But it does account for $17 million annually. And some of the top industry areas are food manufacturing, fishing, and computer and electronic products. So the first thing to understand is the benefit of tariffs or no tariffs, nearly no tariffs when you're exporting to Canada and Mexico. There's a few small categories related to dairy with Canada, but other than that, your goods would be traded tariff free. The International Trade Administration, we do have an FTA tariff tool. So if you know your product's classification, you can go to our website and input it here, and then you can kind of see what your tariff would be, not only for North American trading, but for other countries as you look to export globally.
Sorry,
So,
Christine, just a quick interruption.
Yeah.
Can you go back? The FTA tariff tool that's underlined there, is
Yes.
that a hyperlink in your presentation?
It is, and I know I
Okay, great.
circulated a PDF, so I'm not sure if it would be linkable, but I can also send that to you afterwards
Sure,
as well.
it'll be linkable. And
Okay.
so if there's any attendees who would like this presentation or any of these presentations later, please let us know. And Jamie from DBET will also have a copy of them. So thank you very much. Please proceed.
Yep.
Christine, you got muted somehow.
All right. Not sure how that happened. Thank you very much. So I was saying for any companies who have exported to Canada and Mexico before, under the Nafta, you had to use a certificate of origin, which was paperwork that went along with your products in order to qualify for the preferential tariff benefits. But now on USMCA, you don't need that certificate anymore. You do need certification and proof and paperwork, but it's not that specific certificate. So the Customs and Border Protection does have an example of this certificate, or not certificate, but all of the items that you need to prove on their website. And I have linked that template here also for your reference. But some of those items that you would need to provide, there are 9 here that you can see. These elements may be provided on an invoice or any other document and can be presented in any format. The USMCA allows producers, exporters, or importers to supply the information needed to certify the product's origin. However, the importer is responsible for exercising reasonable care concerning the accuracy of all the documents. Another benefit under that USMCA is that the document that certifies origin may be completed electronically or with an electronic or digital signature. The de minimis threshold, that sets the value of goods below which no duties or taxes are collected by customs. So when you export to Canada, an express shipment, it would qualify duty-free up to 40 Canadian dollars. Let me see here. What is it? Duty-free, oh, sorry, tax-free under 40 and duty-free under 150. So those numbers were increased. For Mexico, you can see here that it would be $50 tax-free and $117 duty-free. The United States has a de minimis level of $800, which is much higher and was changed a few years ago. But at least for very small shipments that you would be sending to Canada or Mexico, you would have some of these benefits on duties and taxes. So rules of origin. This was one of the major changes between NAFTA and USMCA. This likely wouldn't apply to a number of the companies on the call today because they focus in the areas of autos, chemicals, and steel. But what the idea is here is that stronger rules of origin would help preserve manufacturing and production of these goods within the North American bloc. So for example, with automobiles in Nafta, 62.5% of the vehicle needed to be made within North America to qualify for tariff-free trade. Whereas now in USMCA, it's 75% of the vehicle. So they're trying to reduce the amount of the content of that vehicle that is made outside of the North America bloc. For autos, also, one of the changes has to do with the labor that is used to manufacture that vehicle. There's now a new provision which requires that a certain percentage of the vehicle be made in a factory where the workers are making at least $16 per hour. So that's trying to ensure that workers are being paid a certain amount of money, and that then the jobs stay also in good jobs stay in North America. There are similar types of these changes in chemicals and steel, which I've listed here. Now on to the second part, which is looking at some of the major differences in key chapters. So all of these chapters were in NAFTA and they still stayed in USMCA, but there's upgrades to them. So in the intellectual property rights chapter, this is one of the strongest chapters we have with any trading partner in the entire world. One of the changes is that there's a minimum copyright term of 70 years. Before in NAFTA, that was 50 years. So that added 20 years on for the copyright industry. It also requires ex officio authority for law enforcement officials to stop suspected counterfeit or pirated goods when they cross the border. So that's always been a problematic area with counterfeit goods traded across North America. So this is a really important provision. And then there are some really strong standards on protecting trade secrets. In the Customs and Trade Facilitation chapter, now parties are required to publish information like import, export, and transit requirements, as well as all the fees, charges, and penalties on the internet. So that provides more transparency for companies to see what all of the requirements might be. Customs administrations will have new obligations to ensure fairness and integrity in customs work. So that means all procedures should be consistent through any port of entry. And under the customs chapter, express shipments valued below $2,500 US will benefit from reduced paperwork. So before I talked about the reduced taxes and duties for de minimis, and now this is reduced paperwork for shipments under $2,500. For agriculture, the USMCA maintains NAFTA's existing zero tariff treatment and expands US access to Canada's dairy market, and includes some other important upgrades in areas of agricultural biotechnology and sanitary and phytosanitary measures, which is a fancy way of saying animal and plant health. And we have Holly Higgins, who will speak later, who's an expert in all of this on these topics. For the financial services chapter, there are some new prohibitions on local data storage requirements. And in the textiles and apparel chapter, there's new rules that incentivize the use of regional inputs. Now on to the new exciting chapters that didn't exist in NAFTA. Good regulatory practices, a chapter I worked on, is very exciting. This is all about creating transparency and predictability in the regulatory processes of all three countries. So when any regulations change that may impact your particular industry, the three countries have committed that they're going to publish the changes with enough time. They will allow for comments from industry and companies to submit. They will review the comments and respond to your comments. And so this is all about transparency, and it's one of the strongest commitments that they have anywhere globally on this, and we're looking to replicate this model with other countries. Then there was a digital trade chapter. So NAFTA, when that was created, there were floppy disks, and now data is sent around on servers and virtually all over the world. So it's important to have commitments in this area. So one of them is that it would prohibit the application of customs duties and discriminatory measures to digital products that are distributed electronically, like videos, music, software, and games. It can ensure that data can be transferred across borders, which would be really important. So say you have a technology company in Hawaii and you want to do operations or use your data in Canada or vice versa, you wouldn't need to physically then set up a data center in Canada, because the data would be able to freely flow across the borders. And then there is a small and medium enterprises chapter. So this is the first time in any US free trade agreement that we focus particularly on small and medium-sized enterprises. They've already had a committee meeting between the three countries where they're looking at trying to create more products and webinars and resources for small companies to better understand the agreement, take advantage of the agreement, trade with each other. So as we have that sort of information and resources, we'll be sure to send it out to Rob and Dale and others. Then environment and labor. So environment and labor obligations were tangentially part of NAFTA, but they were not a part of the core agreement. And so they were transferred now to be a core part of the agreement. On the environment, there's obligations about combating trafficking and wildlife, timber and fish, strengthening law enforcement around that, addressing environmental issues on air quality and marine litter. On labor, they require parties to adopt and maintain labor rights as recognized by the International Labor Organization, obligates parties to address violence against workers, and prohibits the importation of goods made by forced labor. So here I have listed a number of resources. The first one is the International Trade Administration, our website on USMCA, which you can find a lot of the information that I shared today. Customs and Border Protection, which has a lot of great, very detailed information on how to export your good and fill out all of the paperwork. USTR, which is much more on the high policy side, some of those areas I touched on today. And finally, the USDA's Foreign Agricultural Service, focused on the ag exports. So I hope that wasn't too boring on the policy side. I'm always happy to answer questions at the end of the program now, or via email or phone call after, if it would be helpful just doing one-on-one. So thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Christine. Our next speaker is Jim Rogaccio. Jim, I'm going to make you a co-host, and you will be able to share your presentation. Now, Jim is in Ottawa, and I assume that there's a lot of snow there right now.
Yep, there's a lot of snow. The Rideau Canal is one big skating rink, and although it's sunny and the ice on the street's starting to melt, but yeah, spring's coming.
Great. So Jim is going to Jim will speak specifically about Canada and some of the opportunities that are there for our Hawaii companies. I think, first of all, even though Canada is our closest friend and nearest neighbor with Mexico, probably a lot of people forget that the capital of Canada is Ottawa and not Toronto. And so you are very much based in the Ottawa area, and we thank you for dialing into our meeting today. The situation in Hawaii is quite a bit different than it is in Ottawa. As I explained to you in our emails before this call, that most of our companies here are interested in selling their products to Canada. I think our Hawaii companies are attracted by the lack of red tape, or at least less red tape than there is in selling product to Japan or the Philippines or where have you. So we'd like very much to hear your opinion of that and tell us what's going on with the Canada market.
Great. Well, thanks, Rob and Dale, for the invite. Can you see my PowerPoint there on your screen?
Okay, we can. Okay,
great. So thanks, Christine, for that excellent overview of USMCA. We lots of great opportunities to build on the new agreement. So let's get started talking about Canada and the market opportunities here. So this is not a picture of the Hawaiian Islands, as you probably can tell. But as I was preparing for this presentation, I found something really super interesting about a connection that Hawaii has with Canada. And that special connection is a historical one. When in the late 1700s, there were many indigenous Hawaiians who left Hawaii, and they settled in what they call the Salish Sea, which is the islands off of British Columbia. And there were some that many came for working for the Hudson Bay Company and in the fur trade, and even understand that some of the Hawaiian royalty, when they were losing some of their rights or autonomy back home, they headed for these islands. So that was started in the late 1700s, and then apparently by the mid 1800s, that they say half of the population of these Gulf Islands off of British Columbia were Hawaiians that had settled there. So a very interesting connection. And I said that a direct connection continues today, which is a nod to the Canadians' love of going to Hawaii for winter vacations. You have Air Canada and WestJet are bringing lots of Canadians to Hawaii. And I know some things changed yesterday with some federal restrictions or requirements on international travel, but end of last year, I know that there was a lot of work done by Hawaii and airlines like WestJet to be part of the Trusted Traveler program. And what that did was it allowed the Canadians to show up with a negative COVID test and avoid the quarantine requirements. Again, that's changing, but the pandemic will end, and any sort of dip in business that you might see in these next few months will surely rebound at some point. And it will rebound because, as this slide points out, we have a very long, solid, strong bilateral partnership with Canada. The picture there is Joe Biden when he was vice president meeting with newly installed Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau. I was watching a Financial Times interview with Justin Trudeau talking about his work with the Biden administration, and the Canadian Prime Minister quickly started calling President Biden Joe. So I know they have a close friendship there, and that's a great start. And then, of course, my favorite quote from John F. Kennedy, which is etched into the embassy wall and is an inspiration for coming to work. I especially like the, economics has made us partners, right? So we work together. There's a huge amount of trade bilaterally. I mean, this was just to sort of reinforce the importance of North American trade, but bilaterally, there's $2 billion a day of trade that crosses the U.S.-Canada border, and that's very impressive and significant. And hopefully, there'll probably be a little bit of a dip during the pandemic, but that should be coming back very strongly. Great. So let's turn now to the market in Canada. And first, just like to set the stage by talking about Canada's market resilience during the pandemic, because there are many markets where U.S. exporters have lost markets. Canada, has experienced disruption from the pandemic, but as I tried to sort of illustrate here, it's stayed fairly resilient, right? So, Canada has been the single largest U.S. export market. It's the second largest source of foreign direct investment. And my prediction is that pretty soon it'll be number one. We have the Canadian government from the start has been very focused on managing the pandemic, listening to scientists, keeping people safe, and really focusing on economic recovery. So that is a reason to be very optimistic about the Canadian market. All right, some Hawaii-Canada trade and investment highlights. Very much following sort of the trends in the US. Although in the US, Canada is the single largest source of visitors into the US. For Hawaii, Canada is the second largest source of visitors. And we all know that's because the Japanese really like also going to Hawaii. Canadian tourists contributed over $1 billion to the Hawaiian economy in 2018. That's an increase of 8% from the year before. Seventh largest source of international students. And there's some room for improvement there because overall, if you look at the entire United States, Canadians are the fifth largest source of international students. So the potential is there, although proximity is what allows a lot of the universities in the sort of Great Lakes area in the US to attract Canadians. So something from the Canadian Trade Commissioner Service in Hawaii, you can see there on the slide, Canadian, and this speaks to the aggressive nature of, or the sort of the forward-leaning nature of Canadian companies investing in the US. 30 Canadian companies in Hawaii, so supporting 1,100 jobs and contributing $61 million in salaries. So that's something that, as you'll see at the end of my presentation, is an area to focus on. Just breaking down a little bit about the, the exports, the merchandise and agriculture exports, very heavy on the agriculture side. There's quite a bit of animal and food products, some transportation equipment. This data, this is from the US Department of Commerce. My next slide is from the Canadian Statistics Bureau. They break down the agriculture products a little bit more. Hawaii sends a lot of papayas to Canada, and some other important agricultural products, from pineapple to coffee to plants and animals. including bees. So that's pretty exciting. So let's look at sort of what we say are best prospects for U.S. exporters into Canada, and then we'll go into some areas that I feel are best prospects specifically for Hawaii. So in general, best prospects that we tell U.S. exporters about are in defense and aerospace. Lots of defense projects in the pipeline, some delay with the pandemic, but major upgrades to the Canadian defense platforms. Aerospace is an important industry, very well integrated supply chains with the US. In the information and communication technology, there's a lot of tech firms, especially for in British Columbia, which there's some natural affinity there with Hawaii, but even Toronto, Ontario, and also Ottawa, Ontario are centers for technology firms. Shopify, for example, is Canadian and headquartered here in Ottawa. On the energy side, lots of potential there in renewable energy solutions. Small modular reactors is a big initiative. So everybody involved in that supply chain has opportunities there. And then when I talk about supply chain security, we're really talking about both in terms of looking into new areas like critical minerals to traditional areas, where we have very integrated supply chains for medical and transportation solutions, and not only maintaining that but enhancing it to prevent future disruptions when we have things like pandemics come around, and also take advantage of USMCA. Automotive is a big area. We've all know about the fact that the production between the automotive production centers in the US and in Ontario are very integrated. Healthcare, lots of now attention being put on like telemedicine, reaching folks in the Arctic, for example. So there's a lot of opportunity there. And of course, as we heard from Christine, there's a lot of policy issues that are being worked on under USMCA implementation that will open up more opportunities, protect intellectual property rights, and address sort of the peculiarities of the Canadian Confederation and interprovincial trade obstacles. All right, so now we talk a little bit from, at least from my perspective, what are the best prospects for Hawaii? Because you look at the data and you look at what Hawaii is known for, and you match that with the Canadian best prospects, and you this is things that I'd like to, maybe we can talk more about in the future and follow up emails and calls. Travel and tourism, how do we help your destinations and your service providers attract more visitors from Canada, so that they can go from number 2 to number 1 as a source for international travel to Hawaii. Education, your Canada is number 7 for Hawaii, and for the rest of the US, Canada is number 5. So there is that potential there to further increase that. So we're happy to work with universities in Hawaii to find a way to tap into the Canadian market. Foreign direct investment is also very strong, as Canada is the second largest investor in the US. Happy to, again, work with your economic development officials there and private developers, and even investment fund managers to tap into the investor dollars here in Canada. And then agriculture, you're already, Hawaii is very strong in that area. I'm happy to connect you with our Foreign Agriculture Service colleagues here in Ottawa and elsewhere to build on Hawaii's success in exporting agricultural products to Canada. So I know, Rob, you had a couple questions early on about sort of how the Department of Commerce and International Trade Administration helps. I mean, you don't really have to sort of know the distinction other than the fact that, we are trying to stay, client centered so that when, no matter where that person comes into our network, whether it's, in our Hawaii U.S. Export Assistance Center, whether it's in one of our offices in Canada, whether it's with Christine or one of our colleagues in Washington, D.C., that we work together and find the right solution for them. Is it counseling? Is it commercial diplomacy, which can include advocacy? We have a whole list of a menu of services to facilitate business and business matching. Those are all available to U.S. companies that are employing people in the United States and exporting products from the United States, as well as economic development officials looking for investment, universities looking for students, et cetera, et cetera. So www.trade.gov, that's where you start. So mahalo, thank you very much. Here is my email, my phone number. Looking forward to working with you and your member companies in the future.
Great. Thanks so much, Jim. It was an excellent presentation. We appreciate you taking the time and making it very Hawaii specific. I'm sure there'll be some questions at the end. I should interject here that you had mentioned the U.S. Export Assistance Center, and we do have a great guy here in Honolulu named John Holman at the Foreign Trade Zone of Pier 2, and he is your window into communicating with these guys, Christine, Holly, and others. But John has mentioned how many commercial service stations there are around the world. I think it's 80 something. Do you know offhand how many are out there?
Yeah, in around the world, yes, it's just under 100. In the U.S., it's about 100 offices around the U.S. So, we're a unique federal agency in that way that we have a domestic and a foreign field and working together. So John actually can link you not just to Canada, but to your all around the world where we have those 80 plus foreign commercial service offices in embassies or consulates in markets that make up the majority of the U.S. export markets around the world. So yeah, he's a great resource and has ability to connect directly with us and help your member companies find the right person.
Great, thank you very much. Our next speaker is Steve Alley. He's in Mexico City. He has a, I guess you call him a counterpart of Jim, but Steve can explain his position there. Steve, I've made you a co-host. Are you able to share your presentation?
Not seeing a message. I can share my screen.
Yeah, if you share your screen. Great.
Actually, that's not it. There it is. Can you see it?
Yep, we can see it.
Okay. Well,
It's okay. Actually, I can share it from my side and you can just tell me when to change the slide. Is that all right?
yeah, I'm just looking for, trying to figure out how to scroll down through the slides. I'm not finding
That's
it.
just bear with me 1 second and I'll get your presentation up here.
Okay.
Mexico is open for business.
All right, you got it?
Yep.
Okay, let's go. Hello, everyone. Yes, I am the Senior Commercial Officer for Mexico, as Jim is for Canada. So I'm going to give you sort of a strategic review of what's going on in the Mexican market here. And then my colleague, Holly Higgins, who's with me here in Mexico City, is going to talk about the Mexican market as it concerns food and agriculture. So next slide, please. We've talked a little bit. I think most of you already know who we are. We just talked about our services. If you need more information, and we have our Export Assistance Center there in Hawaii. We have 3 offices in Mexico. We just talked about our offices worldwide and in the US. Rob, next slide, please. Can you go to the next one? There we go. Again, just expanded list of what we do for business, both within our overseas offices and more broadly within ITA. So next slide, please. So Mexico at a glance. I would say that most of you are probably aware that China exploded onto the scene as a trading partner with the US once it joined the World Trade Organization. And kind of similarly for Mexico, it's been since the original Nafta was signed in the mid-90s. And so it's been a much quieter process, but now we've arrived at the point where Mexico is the largest goods trading partner with the United States. The volume of merchandise going across the border every day is enormous. And Mexico is also, if you have to generalize, is a manufacturing powerhouse. As you can see some statistics here, 15th largest world economy. I'll note the poverty rate there, 42%. What that also means is that you've got almost 50% middle class, and then you do have a lot of wealth disparity. So you have a large number of very wealthy Mexicans, but in terms of market, 50% of 126 million people is still a very, very large market segment. Competitiveness 48th. It's not great. It's largely because of productivity, and then corruption is a perennial and endemic problem in Mexico. It's improved slightly, but it's still at a number of 130. So that's something that's potentially relevant for companies as you do business here. So next, please, Rob. Yes, I mentioned a goods relationship. Yes, largest trading partner in goods. And just like Jim mentioned, first or second export destination for 24 US states. Next slide, please. And is relevant, there's 50,000 US SMEs who are doing business in Mexico. So this is it's a pretty wide open and easy place to do business thanks to NAFTA. There you can see exports. Next slide, please. We're going to go over our best prospects, but by the numbers, by the customs numbers, these are the categories. So let's keep going. Yes, these are the first and second. These are the states that do the most exporting to Mexico. Obviously, the ones on the border make sense, and then a lot in the middle. And yes, so I mentioned manufacturing is a really key feature of the relationship, especially the integrated nature of the manufacturing between the US and Mexico and Canada. So there's a lot of cross-border supply chains, and it's not going across just once. There's a pretty well-read report that came out about 6 years ago from the Wilson Center that talked about products going back and forth across the board, input products rather, going back and forth across the border multiple times before the final product was exported from either the US or Mexico. So that means that whoever is exporting, if Mexico exports it, for example, there's an awful lot of US content typically involved. So you can see Mexico exports more manufactured goods than the rest of Latin America combined. It's the 6th largest worldwide in passenger vehicles, the largest television manufacturer, the largest market for auto parts from the US, et cetera. Next slide, please. So obviously, as with Canada, there's a lot of advantages to the close proximity. Same time, well, maybe less so for Hawaii, but same time zones for most of our companies. Business travel is relatively easy. Transportation, logistics, we've got 38 airports have direct flights. We talked about the size of the economy, the middle class here in Mexico. And then, of course, the shared cultural and people-to-people connections, the very large Mexican-American community in the U.S., which facilitates doing business as well. And of course, Mexico is a great source for tourists visiting the United States as well. Next slide, please. As Christine mentioned, the key benefit to NAFTA is zero tariffs. And that hasn't changed from the original NAFTA, the USMCA. It's the biggest net advantage to the trade agreement. Relative economic and political stability in Mexico. Up until about 2000, I believe Mexico had the world's longest single party in power. It might have been something like 80 years. Since 2000, you've kind of had an explosion of messy democracy, and you've had different parties win the presidential election, and now we have a party that has never before held power. They have some policies which are causing some pain to certain sectors in the United States. Preferences for closing energy opportunities off to the private sector, for example, preferences to state-run, a preference to direct award procurement contracts, things like that. So it just kind of depends on which sector you're in, but the overall trading relationship is still fundamentally very, very sound and thriving. As I mentioned, we have 3 offices in Mexico. Mexico City, Mexico is, as you probably know, it's highly centralized. So the majority of the economic activity and decisions are made here in Mexico City. But we also from here, and this is our largest office by far, we cover some other centers around Mexico City, like Toluca and Puebla, and also Querétaro, which is right in the middle of Mexico. It's called Bajío, and it's really come on the scene as the desirable place to do manufacturing in Mexico because of the relative security and safety and business-friendly policies in that region. So we cover it from Mexico City. Monterrey, up closer to the border, is very well, has long been a very pro-business place within Mexico. Lots of U.S. investment there, lots of manufacture. It's close to the Maquila areas. And then Guadalajara to the west is, as it says, the agricultural heartland, R&D, a little bit of digital, agribusiness, food processing and packaging companies in particular. So, And there's just a map showing the locations of our 3 offices and 3 main commercial points of gravity within Mexico. These are our best prospects. You can take a look at it. Again, it's a manufacturing heavy economy, but it's widely diversified. And you can see, I think we have, what is this, about 20 best prospects. So if any of these resonate with you, happy to talk to you or reach out, and we'll discuss in more detail. As with many of our markets overseas, you're going to hear similar advice in terms of how to enter the market here. Typically, it's going to be the best way is initially at least finding a representative or distributor. And then price, again, important, but not necessarily, it's not always the lowest price. Spanish is really critical. You've got to be prepared to do business in a Spanish-speaking country. And luckily to do that, most of our clients, obviously that serves you throughout almost the entire hemisphere, south, except for Brazil and as well as Spain. So. Personal safety, nowadays the conversation is more about COVID, and COVID has hit Mexico hard, very hard. It's probably similar to the United States. It's a very high mortality rate. Personal safety prior to COVID was the big topic of conversation because of all the spectacular violence you see in Mexico and the cartels. But in terms of doing business in Mexico, flying into Mexico City or other Guadalajara, Monterrey, doing business, having business meetings, there's absolutely no issue with that. It's more about especially border zones and areas where people and merchant drugs and other things are trafficked, which is problematic. It's important that you know where you don't go. But just to give indicative statistics, I haven't had them updated yet, but basically several years ago, Mexico City had a homicide rate of 9 per 100,000, and you compare it to a host of U.S. cities, and several of which, like St. Louis, I believe, maybe Baltimore, others were over 40, many over 30. So Mexico City is clearly an easy place and a safe place to come and do business. And then investment promotion, we've talked about attracting investment back to the United States, and Mexico is a fairly important player. Food and tobacco in particular, but auto components make sense. These are some of the sectors that are where we see the most Mexican investment back into the U.S. And yes, that's our Select USA program, which I hope you're aware of. Next slide, please. And resources again. So we're here. We're happy to help. We're happy to talk to you if you think the Mexican market offers some opportunities for any of you out there. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. This is great. Maybe if you don't mind, just spend a minute on Select USA. Some of our attendees may not have heard that before.
Sure. Select USA is a program that was started, maybe my colleagues can help me out, I want to say about 8 years ago. And it's the brand we use to promote foreign investment into the United States. And so we do that in a number of ways. Probably the signature event every year is called the Select USA Summit, and it happens in Washington, and it's a big deal. We have delegations from all over the world, many led by ambassadors. We have cabinet level participation across the board. I think 2 years ago, 2019 was the last year it was live. and Secretary Ross was the host. But years before that, I believe we even had President Obama open the summit. So it typically lasts several days. We have our state economic development organizations and offices there on site. So there's it's a very efficient way for foreign companies to scope out the US market and opportunities. But we support Select USA outside of that summit, which is just a yearly event in terms of counsel and helping foreign companies figure out where to go and invest. And for state development offices like Hawaii's, we do things called a single location promotion, which is designed to feature the advantages. You know, what industries do you attract in Hawaii? And then we do a targeted event here in Mexico and in other markets. But if I can't recall if I said this, Select USA Summit is now virtual, of course, because of the pandemic. So I should add that.
Great. When is that roughly?
That is June 7 through 11, I believe, this June. If Jim, if you or Christine.
Yes, that's correct. June 7 to 11, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Okay.
Okay. I had a brief computer freeze. Next is our next speaker is Holly Higgins. She's also in Mexico City. Holly is going to speak specifically about the situation for our Hawaii companies and what is possible in that regard. So Holly, please proceed and then just signal me that you'd like me to move forward in the presentation.
All right. Well, good morning to all our friends in Hawaii. And thank you, Rob and Christine and Jim. It's good to see you again. And Steve, thanks so much for setting the stage so well for selling Hawaiian products into Mexico and partnering with companies in Mexico. My name again is Holly Higgins, and I head up the USDA office in Mexico City. We're called the Foreign Agricultural Service, and we are a sister agency, if you will, to the Foreign Commercial Service, and work very closely with them. So, and with many of your companies, I believe, as well. We have a footprint here in Mexico in a large number of areas which reflect the broad mission of the USDA overseas. The Foreign Agricultural Service, the specific agency logo you can see here. We provide market intelligence. We do market development, which means marketing and promotions, trade shows, trade missions, umbrella opportunities, technical assistance. So we do some problem solving and troubleshooting. We have a plant and animal health office here, an inspection office for both plant, animal, and food in the food and safety inspection service. And we also partner directly with almost 40 private sector associations. For instance, the state departments of agriculture or the umbrella groups, the Western United States agricultural promotion groups. And inside Mexico, just like Steve mentioned, our main office is in Mexico City. We do have an office up in Monterrey, but we work all around the country and are very pleased to have any kinds of questions and cooperation between our commercial service partners. Rob, why don't we go ahead? So Steve set the ground quite clearly here. Mexico at a glance, we have slightly, I think maybe 2020 numbers here. I'll just touch on three things. One, the wealth disparity. So purchasing power parity is a challenge when you're marketing high value products into Mexico, given the number of Mexicans who live, quote, below the poverty line. And as a result, are price sensitive consumers. And that relates as well to the market entry strategy that Steve related. I think his points remain the same for food and agricultural products coming into Mexico. And so with that, I'll just move ahead. Thanks, Rob. So we've worked a little bit of the COVID situation into here. We don't expect much economic growth in 2021, as well as the decline that happened in 2020. The drivers for the future for 2021 also include the new USMCA. Luckily, as Christine highlighted, we have 0 tariffs, and that's a great advantage. And we have a stable exchange rate. We think that in some areas of the food and agricultural economy, there would be some gradual recovery or a bounce up, but that kind of remains to be seen because, as Steve emphasized, the COVID situation here has hit pretty hard. Go ahead, Todd. So before I jump into the processed food industry, I just want to note that like Hawaii, Mexico is a major producer of a number of horticulture products. So they are the #1 producer of avocados in the world, #3 of papaya, #5 pecan, #6 guava, #6 sugarcane, #9 tomato, #9 pineapple, and #11 coffee, bananas, and cocoa. So with this strong domestic production of tropical fruits, they import small amounts of fruits from the US, but they're in the northern varieties, so apples and pears. And those come in for medium and high income consumers. In terms of the vegetable imports that come into Mexico, the 2 top vegetables that the US exports to Mexico are onions and fresh potatoes. And again, that's just a function of the growing regions. We do have some nut exports from the US to Mexico, leading with pecans, followed by peanuts and almonds. And we hold almost all the market share there, thanks to the 2,000-mile border and the 0 tariffs. Most products, raw products that come in from the US, whether it's Hawaii, California, or Texas, would require some kind of inspection process at the border, usually in the plant health area, but also for meats and animal products, to make sure the product is free of pests. So I'm going to dive a little bit into the processed food industry here. The Mexican market represents a significant opportunity, even though it's only almost 3%. It still is a place where we see success in exporting processed food products, mainly in the bakery and tortilla area, as well as processed meats such as jerky and some dairy products. The companies that do food processing in Mexico are huge. Grupo Bimbo is considered the largest bakeries products manufacturer in the world, and throughout Latin America is very present. And the #1 processor of dairy products is Lala. And then all of the main international companies are present in Mexico: Nestle, Mars, Mondelez, Tyson. And as Steve noted, these companies work in Spanish. They are very specific to the Mexican market. So why don't we go to the next one, please. So the target market for US value-added food exports are middle and upper income consumers who are looking for value-added products, snack foods, and other goods. And down in the Guadalajara area, as Steve mentioned, there are a lot of the food processors, and they look for some raw product materials. There is a certain amount of national rhetoric here, but that does not drive consumption or demand. Economics, price sensitivity really is the #1 thing when you're talking about food products. And of course, taste. Mexicans have their own taste, their own culture, their own preferences, and convenience. There are a lot of 2 household, 3 household worker families, and so convenience is important. And because of this close cooperation, cultural affinities, and shared borders, what products are domestic versus international it's sometimes blurred there. So we don't see as much of a distinction there as we might in other products. And some imported food products have aspirational status, and those might be the higher value, more expensive products. So why don't we go on to the next one? I'll talk about a trend. Healthy packaged food consumption is growing, and we see an increased amount of household expenditure going to the quote, the healthy foods category, wellness foods, whatever that broad category might encompass, products that are light, less calorie, organic, functional, perhaps vitamins are added and considered, quote, healthy. In general, Mexican consumers look for individual or small portions. This is a function of the price sensitivity here. And price sensitivity is present even in the higher value health food markets as well. So why don't we go on now? So the food sales in general, but as well as healthy packaged foods that would probably be from Hawaii, are sold mainly in the center to the southern part of the country. And you can see that Mexico City, because of the population concentration and the relative wealth compared to some of the more rural areas, less affluent areas, Mexico City consumes over 25% of all packaged food goods, including healthy products in Mexico. And that's one reason we are anchored here. However, we are active, as I said, in other areas. And the #1 food show where processed foods are shown is UNTAD down in the center area there in Guadalajara. And we are present there, USDA's Foreign Agricultural Service, every year with an umbrella pavilion. And we absolutely encourage participation from Hawaiian companies that are looking to try out the market.
Can you spell that again for us?
Sure. UNTAD, ANTAD. That's the acronym. Okay. And I'll give and I can put it in the chat too, Rob. I'll give the email that we use for inquiries, and any kind of inquiry about trade shows, et cetera, can be sent to that. And just a little point here that we work really closely on state trade missions with the Department of Commerce here, with our Foreign Commercial Service friends. And so we're happy to participate when there's a mixed Hawaii show or a mixed Hawaii trade mission, virtually or in person, to Mexico.
When is UNTAD usually?
UNTAD is usually in the fall, but it's been sliding because you can imagine in a country like Mexico, in-person shows are really important. Tasting, feeling food products are really important. And it was supposed to take place in October of this past year. Tentatively, the organizers have moved it to June, but they've flagged for us that it may actually slip to a full year, October next year, entirely because of COVID. And we would be widely advertising as and when that show comes back online in whatever form they decide to do, whether it's virtual or in person. But right now, tentatively, they're hoping the country will be open for visitors and in-person participation in June, July. I frankly, and Steve maybe can comment, and I'm a little skeptical about that, but we absolutely would be happy to keep anyone abreast of that.
Thank you.
So why don't we move to some forecasts that are based on some market research and consumer surveys that our office here in Mexico City did. This just shows that what you might expect, lower cost nuts, seeds, and trail mix are really popular here. And the other food products that might be a little bit more expensive are trail just a little bit in the consumption inside Mexico. Why don't we go on? And I just wanted to show an example of Mexican specific umbrella advertising that we support. So a number of US groups, I don't know if you can make out those cartoon characters, there's pears, there's apples, there's plums there. They got together and with support from our office, they do a healthy eating campaign inside Mexico using the popularity of lucha libre, which is the Mexican freestyle wrestling. In this case, this is targeting healthy eating inside schools and amongst school children. Mexico, unfortunately, has a high rate of childhood and adolescent obesity. There's growing awareness about this. Parents, schools, certainly the current government is making a point to emphasize healthier eating, and using a fund and a program that USDA's Foreign Agricultural Service has for global-based or umbrella promotions. These groups got together out of the US, pears, apples, and they put together a number of healthy eating cartoons, promotions, lectures. I think you can see maybe at the bottom there, blueberries, apples, pears. It's kind of small print, but this is just an example of the kind of work that we're doing here right now, since the cartoon characters and others cannot go into the schools. This is running virtually, and they do have a substantial Facebook presence. They also are preparing outreach on healthy eating, just basic healthy eating packages in Spanish for schools that might be interested. All right, now some results of our own surveys and communication with buyers. I'll just start with the negatives, perceptions of US food imports. Our products can be seen as fattening. There is this perception that we have hormone added poultry, whereas Mexico doesn't. There's a perception that our foods might have high levels of processing or be expensive. But then if you go over to the positive category, they do view, Mexican consumers do view US food products as generally being of quality, and that our food products, our labels are credible in terms of delivering what is in the package is on the label. They believe that US food products have certain varieties and novelties, heal thyself, that some of our nutraceutical foods are interesting. They understand that there is a wide availability, and they appreciate the marketing information that is shared. So now I'll turn to consumer trends during COVID. Again, this is a result of, I'd say, the last 10 months of our research. There's been increasing demand for home delivery through a plethora of online services. You can get almost anything delivered by third-party apps, certainly in the urban areas, of course, less so in the rural areas. And this trend is forecast to continue. The major cities have a rolling policy of red light, orange light, stoplights to indicate whether or not in-store service or in-cafe service might be available. But we assume that there will continue to be a stronger emphasis on takeaway services. And as the social distancing policies in the city have resulted in these lockdowns, there's been a certain decline in the demand from hotel, restaurant, and institutional catering, and a greater emphasis on at-home eating. So you can understand that if a school or a tourist area has been shut down, the restaurants closed, there simply would be less demand for institutional catering products. Go ahead, Rob. So we assume that following the pandemic, given the economic situation, the focus will be on value for money, added health sanitary benefits. There's certainly a growing awareness of health concerns, perhaps more mood enhancing treats, personal treats, chocolate, and that there is an emphasis on packaging acting as a protective layer. If you go into Mexico City stores right now, a grocery store, you'll be met at the door with someone taking your temperature, offering you hand sanitizer, and there will be an emphasis to discourage touching products directly, although that still certainly happens in some of the open air markets. And then the focus will be not on acquiring more, but simply living better as the COVID situation hopefully fades a bit and Mexico gets its rates of infection under control. Go ahead, Rob.
This is the last slide.
Okay, so then with that, I'll just say that we have a number of reports online, publicly available. They're free. You can Google them at any time, and I'll put the email address in the chat. You can always email us at this address and ask us if we have any reports available in a specific subcategory, and we'll be sure to get back to you. I guess with that, I will stop and thank you again for the time here to talk to you and look forward to hearing from you. Thank you, Rob and all.
Thank you very much. Excellent presentation. Before we move on to general Q&A, I'll just ask you, because Department of Agriculture is a completely different department of the government from the commercial service. If a Hawaii company wants to contact the Department of Agriculture staff, such as yourself in Mexico City or anywhere else, Tokyo or what have you, do they go through our John Holman here at the U.S. Export Assistance Center, or is there some other contact we would use?
They can come directly to us, and I'm in the process of typing in this email. We work directly with individual companies, with organizations. And of course, you know, if there's anything that overlaps, we work obviously very directly with our Department of Commerce folks here in country and follow their guidance on how to carry out services.
Okay, great. Back here's I just wanted to go through a couple of these websites before we jump into Q&A. By the way, attendees, if you have any questions, please type them into the Q&A function. Here's the International Trade Administration at trade.gov. There's just a ton of information here. A reminder that this is the HiSTEP headquarters at invest.hawaii.gov, and click on this exporting tab. My organization here, the Hawaii Pacific Export Council nonprofit, this is our board members. We're all appointed by U.S. Commerce Secretary. This webinar that you're attending now is being recorded and will eventually, within a couple of weeks, be archived on the Hawaii Pacific Export Council YouTube channel, as well as on the DBET archive. And we'll have the presentations available on the DBET archive as well, all the PDFs that are here. So with that, I'd like to open this up to questions. Bear with me for a second while I open those up. There's one question here. Do you have any insights or info into Mexico's recent legalization of cannabis? What does that mean for the US growers?
Holly, is cannabis fast or?
Well, I can tell you that right now, when we receive an inquiry about cannabis as a plant, if you will, we refer it to the Drug Enforcement Agency. There are some ingredients that contain cannabinoids, but it would be, we'd have to kind of find out more about the actual product to know where it might fit and how it might fit. I will say that to date, we have not seen this as a big trend here in Mexico. And I'd maybe flip it up to Steve, because I recall there was greater interest in cannabis up in Mexico, or up in Canada, sorry. Jim.
How about CBD oil? We have some CBD oil manufacturers in Hawaii.
Yeah, this is Jim. So yeah, here in Canada, there's been quite a bit of activity on cannabis, CBD oil, and even like products that support the growing of cannabis and the production of CBD oil. And at least from the previous administration, their guidance was this is a illegal substance according to federal law and guidelines. And while a state might legalize it, the US federal government is not to be involved in supporting the production and distribution of cannabis. So we have a new administration. It could change, I'm not sure, but the current guidance we have from our headquarters is not to, for us not to get involved in it. Now, if the question is more about what the market is and, is it being legalized and what the Mexican law is, that's, I guess, a different question. But like, can the US government help you export cannabis or cannabis products or equipment that produces cannabis or CBD oils to Mexico? At least from the guidance I've received from our headquarters is the answer is no, the federal government cannot help you. However, it doesn't mean that there aren't private companies or consultants or people that you can connect with who can help you with that for that market opportunity.
This is Holly. In Mexico, if it's under 1% THC, it's legal. We have not done a lot of research in Mexico on Mexican cannabis production for, I guess, obvious reasons. I would say that informally, they appear to be emerging as a potential competitor in this area. But if there's food ingredients that contain THC or CBD, we're happy to see what kind of research we can do. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Here's one question about Canada. Canada is geographically an enormous country. Is there a difference in the culture or the tastes between the East and the West part of Canada? For example, most companies in Hawaii would be a bit more used to the Vancouver side of things versus the Nova Scotia side of things. So can you speak to that briefly?
Yes, there's a huge difference, and it's even reinforced by the way the provinces even trade with each other. The fact that there's no equivalent of like an interstate commerce clause, that Canada is a confederation of provinces. There's a lot less east-west flow of products, and that it reinforces itself in consumer preferences and things. It's most pronounced in Quebec. Quebec, which many years ago was New France, that in our lifetime had almost voted to secede from Canada and start their own country. Where French is widely spoken and the sort of worldview is much more European. Yeah, the preferences are and the differences are very distinct. So yeah, I would agree that the connection for Hawaii is Western Canada, both because of air routes. So like if you're shipping fresh produce, I mean, it's much better to have that direct connection. The travel time for a tourist to come to Hawaii is much better to look at that Western market, from British Columbia and Alberta, and students as well, just because coming from the East Coast, it's much further. And yeah, and then of course there are regional differences in tastes, and so it is very interesting. And then another another distinction is also the Arctic Canada, which is a whole nother market in itself. So I don't know if that answered the question, but
yeah, that's great. I'd just like to point out to our attendees that Canada is not a big monolithic country where it's all the same. There's a huge difference between the East and the West. And, as you said, the Arctic part. Another question has come in from one of our great local distillers. What are the rules involved in shipping distilled spirits into Canada?
So I know it's tends to be a high barrier depending on the province. Some easier than others. I know Holly, when she was here in Canada, was always fighting with British Columbia to bring in wine made in the United States. So I'll either ask Holly to give us her firsthand experience, or promise to help follow up with our FAS office here in Ottawa.
Just to comment on that, Jim, that every single province has a different liquor law. And so there's no national entity that regulates distilled spirits or high alcohol content spirits. You have to approach it on a provincial by province by province basis. And then it gets weedy pretty quick.
How about Mexico, Holly? How would a Hawaii company ship distilled spirits to Mexico? Is that difficult?
No, well, it's certainly easier than Canada. And I think just working with a good broker who is able to help target your product toward the appropriate, maybe it's in the hotel, restaurant, tourism area. Maybe it's there's a handful of high-end chains. Because it is a price-sensitive market, certainly more so than Canada, you'd want to work with somebody who knew the market pretty well.
Okay. Another question for Mexico. I think that this is targeted towards the western coast of Mexico, maybe Guadalajara, Baja California. Is there a surf culture there that would be a natural fit for some Hawaii companies that are selling surf-oriented, beach-oriented products? Of course, surfboards, but there's sunscreens and beachwear and the like. Is there a inherent market there?
Yes, absolutely. There's surf cultures in pretty much the entire Pacific coast of Mexico, all the way, down to Puerto Escondido and Acapulco. The whole way. Surfing is a pretty popular activity.
Is there one particular town or city where somebody could start their marketing activity that's sort of the headquarters of the surf culture?
Hard to say off the top of my head. I would say Sayulita, which is just north of Puerto Vallarta. It's a pretty famous location, but if we'd want to look into it and give some advice. I'm not sure you can pick one place because that's a long coastline.
Yeah, long coast.
A lot of coast. Yeah.
Sure. How about, this is a very basic question from a practical standpoint. A Hawaii resident, U.S. citizen, traveling to Canada or Mexico, what do you need? Do you need passports? How do you do that?
So in Canada, yeah, you either use a passport or you use there's like a Nexus, NEXUS card that many folks that cross the border frequently, but I guess don't need to have a full-blown passport can use. But I believe it's I don't know anybody who's actually using one of those Nexus cards, but yeah, passport, you would need a passport. And right now, also there are new restrictions during the pandemic on crossing into Canada, where you need to self-isolate for 2 weeks and before you circulate. And it has to be, you have to enter for an essential reason, and that's defined by the government of Canada. And basically, if you live in Canada, or if you work in Canada, or if you're going to Canada on business, or some other, what's deemed essential, you can enter, but you still need, unless you get some type of very rare waiver, you still need to isolate for 2 weeks.
Let's assume for our discussion that we're all vaccinated and everybody's happy and we're sort of sliding back into a new normal and things are relaxed a bit more. And a Hawaii resident travels to Canada or Mexico, they can easily rent a car with a US driver's license and visit customers or visit distributors. Is that a straightforward process?
Yes, it is. In Canada, you can use your US driver's license. You don't need an international license or a Canadian license. And if you check with your US insurance company, many of the US insurance companies will cover you in Canada for usually up to 120 days, so that you don't need a special policy, or, it doesn't apply for Hawaii, but if you were to drive up, if you flew into Seattle and then you drove up into British Columbia, your insurance, your auto insurance in the US will cover you in Canada, but good to check with your actual provider to make sure that's the case.
And same in Mexico, it's very straightforward, easy to do all over the country. Mexico is more open in terms of COVID. It doesn't have strict requirements on entry. And there's no need to get a visa in advance. You get an automatic tourist visa when you arrive with your passport. That's it.
Great. And a regular T-Mobile, AT&T, Verizon kind of mobile phone plan, no problem to operate in Canada. How about Mexico?
Same thing. It's all treated as one market now. So my US phone is a North American phone for all intents and purposes.
Yeah, and Rob, here's a good tip for folks that, if you have a US phone carrier, like I know with Verizon, they offer two options. One is actually three, you can roam, right? Or you can switch on this global program where for $5 a day, it's just like you're in the US. Or if you're going to be in Canada, for example, for a longer period of time, the best thing is to get one of those unlimited plans, because the unlimited plan tends to include roaming throughout North America. So then you don't even have to pay that $5 a day fee.
Great. I'd like to ask Jim or Steve, could one of you spend just a minute and cover the Gold Key service so we can make sure that our attendees understand what's available there? Because the STEP programs can cover the cost of the Gold Key service if the company applies for and is accepted into the STEP program. So if you could just spend a minute on that.
Yeah, sure. That's probably one of our most popular and successful programs, where we work with a US exporter to help them meet potential business partners based on a questionnaire they fill out and research that our local staff will conduct on their behalf. There's a fee because the Office of Management Budget wants us to recoup costs that are incurred when we work for a specific company, but it's a very reasonable fee, and especially when you're getting support from organizations like HiSTEP. The key thing there is that during the pandemic, we've switched that a little bit, going from, because
one quick question then for Holly. In Hawaii, we have a lot of really excellent honey manufacturers, and I saw your presentation particularly highlighted honey, and I'm curious what types of honey are Mexican consumers using, because I think by the time we were able to product into Mexico, it would be pretty expensive.
So there's a huge range of honey produced in Mexico, and all kinds. It depends on the growing region, right? Where the bees are and where the plants are. There's honey produced in the mountains, near the seaside, in the arid desert regions. Just a word of caution. Mexico is very careful about the importation of honey. So there is more of a bureaucratic process associated with shipping honey than with some other products. And there are some additional certificates that are required. It might depend on whether it's raw or homogenized. So if you could let us know, we'd be happy to look into it. But Rob, to your point, yes, it is a price sensitive market, and the lower priced local honeys are very widely available.
Many of our companies here that are in the skincare products business, whether it's soaps or sunscreens or what have you, are used to, if they've been exporting, they're used to dealing with some fairly rigorous rules in the Japanese market about getting those products tested and labeled and ready for the market in Japan. Is there a similar FDA of Mexico, or what is it like to be able to get products ready for market in Mexico, the skincare types of products?
We'd have to give you specific counsel on that, but I can just say, anecdotally, there's a wide variety of US skincare products here on the market. So I don't imagine that the process is terribly onerous.
Okay, that's good to hear. Okay, there's no further questions. I think that the audience, all the questions are answered from the attendees. So I'd like to close our webinar today on USMCA. Very much thanks to Jamie Lum from DBET, Christine Gomes in Washington, Jim Rogaccio, Steve Alley, and Holly Higgins in Mexico City. Wonderful presentations by all. We greatly appreciate your time and speaking to our Hawaii companies about how they can export. We will pass along your presentations, and you will likely hear from some of our companies directly, but we'll also steer them towards John Holman. And I'd like to thank you again very much. Have a wonderful rest of your afternoon, and we look forward to seeing you maybe again next year for a similar program. So mahalo and much aloha from Hawaii. Thank you.
Okay, mahalo.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Uh-huh.